Hello, everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about inequality, social insurance, and redistributions. Let me just share my screen. So we're going to get started with talking about inequality, poverty, the tools that governments across the world, and we're going to focus on the United States use to address these things and the trade-off between efficiency and equity in addressing these problems. So just a little bit of like a picture of what we're going to be talking about. So right now we're going to be talking about measuring inequality. So we're trying to measure the extent of economic inequalities in the United States, just between individuals, between different groups and stuff like that. Moving forward, so there's a bunch of different types of inequalities that we're going to be addressing. So the first is income inequality. So income is the amount of money that you are going to make in a period. So as an example, if you are working a job and your salary is $60,000 a year, your income is then $60,000. The next is wealth inequality. So wealth is all of your assets. So assets are things that you have. So like usually it's goods that you have, so like a car or a house, but it's also things that you've saved up. So your financial savings and stuff like that. So anything that you like kind of own, you can think of it as like that's an asset. So you have tangible assets, things that you could hold on to, like your house, or intangible that you can't really hold on to, but they're there, like your savings. Then there's also, so the next thing we're going to talk about is permanent income inequality. So someone's permanent income is their average lifetime income that they're going to accumulate over their lifetime, the average of that altogether. The last is intergenerational mobility. So intergenerational mobility is the extent to which your economic future is dependent or independent on the economic status of your parents and the people who came before you. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about the income inequality. So income distribution in the United States is what's depicted in this graph. It's the average annual family income in 2017 before taxes. You could see that as the title of this chart. So if we're looking at this, we're looking at quintiles, which is like dividing up all of the data into 5 groups. So that bottom group, the average annual income, they're making around a little under $20,000 a year. And you can see that highest quintile is making almost $250,000 a year. So there's a pretty big spread. And then the interesting thing to note at the bottom here is the percent of total income. So 3.8 of total income in the US is this bottom 5%. They're making about 4% of all of the income in the US. And this top 20%, this highest quintile, is making almost half of the money in the US, like bringing in almost half the income, and they're only 20% of the population, which is pretty crazy. So one thing to gain from this graph is the income inequality that we experience, that we see here in the United States. This is just more to understand how this has changed over years. So from 1970 to 2017, how the share of total income, where it's going from the highest quintile to the lowest quintile. So you can see that from the fourth, middle, second, and lowest income quintiles, they've all decreased by a few percentage points over the last 40, 50 years, basically. And the only one that's climbed is the highest income quintile, which has gone up almost, it looks like 8% here, which is pretty crazy that the income divide in the United States has only continued to grow throughout the years. So in this graph, you could also see a little bit more in terms of that actual top percent, that top group. So we were looking at the quintile before, so that's the top 20%. Now we're looking at the top 5%, the top 1%, and the top 0.01%. Which we hear about a lot in the news and in places like that. So by looking at a share of their total income, you could see from the 50s to the 80s, there was a bit of a drop of the percentage of income that they actually had, but it's rebounded since then. So you can see that as it's going down, there's less inequality, and as it's going up, there's more inequality. So that has been on the rise, and you could see the 38% of the wealth being held by the top 5% now, with the top 0.1% holding 10.4% of I said wealth, I meant income. But it's pretty crazy to just see this graph and to see how much inequality there is in America. Just one more example to illustrate this point a little bit further is comparing the US income inequality to other nations around the world. So this graph, as it's titled, Household Income in US dollars and adjusted for differences in cost of living. So you could see the 90th percentile means like the top 90% basically, where they rank, and the 10th percentile is like the bottom 10%. So you could see the US, the range, like basically from the lowest to the highest is really, really big. and it's bigger than any of these other nations. These are pretty developed countries. If you've heard of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and the UK, they're pretty big countries. And you just see that people in the US, the rich are richer, and it seems as though the poor are poorer in from this chart. And just one last graph to really drive home the point. So the world distribution of income. So this is the share of global population at each income level. So between $100 to $100,000, just to see where this is all happening. And you could see the hump of the graph where the most people lie is around that $1,000 mark. And just think about it, that this is a yearly, like the annual income per person. So this is a full year's income of $1,000, which is pretty crazy. And you see on the graph, they point out where the poorest 10% of Americans are, which is somewhere between that 1,000 to 10,000 range. And you see it's getting really, really low, closer to the top. And there's also getting much closer towards the bottom, just to give you a little bit of a picture of the income inequality, not just in the US, but around the world. And we're going to call it there. Good luck.